A 10-year-old girl carried a dying newborn to the hospital gates, but instead of being helped, she was turned away, blocked at the door, all because she had no money. Just when every door had slammed shut, a soldier stepped forward, and with one single action, he shook the entire hospital to its core. Clang! The sound of metal striking echoed through the narrow, fog-filled alley. A tin can fell from the worn-out fabric sack Ellie was carrying on her back. She bent down to pick it up, her eyes sweeping across the scattered scraps of junk, littering the ground beneath the cracked wall of an abandoned bus stop. It was just 7 a.m., the sky still grey. Her breath came out in small white clouds. Ellie, 10 years old, thin as a twig, wearing a frayed hoodie with worn elbows, had been wandering for nearly 2 hours. Every morning, while other kids were still curled up under warm blankets, Ellie rummaged through trash bins for plastic bottles and aluminum cans, things she could trade for a few coins at the scrapyard at the end of Southridge Street. She didn't go to school. The landlady once told her she should be thankful just to be surviving here. The alley curved behind the old bus station. The cold from the cement seeped through the soles of her worn-out shoes. Ellie dug into a large cardboard box, but it only held a few crumpled milk cartons and plastic bags. She opened the lid of the next bin. Wah! A faint cry. Ellie froze. It wasn't a cat, not a dog. It was a human sound. She turned her head, listening. The sound came from behind the broken concrete pillars at the far end of the old bus station, the part no one had stepped into for months. Gently setting down her bag of recyclables, Ellie crept forward, her shoes crunching soft paper beneath her feet. There it was, a soggy cardboard box, sunken in as if someone had stepped on it. On top, a thin cloth lay trembling. Ellie dropped to her knees, heart pounding. Her fingers shook as she peeled the fabric back. Inside was a newborn. The baby's skin was ghostly pale, lips purplish blue. The tiny body was swaddled in a drenched, ragged towel. The umbilical cord hadn't dried yet. The baby's eyes were half shut, chest barely rising and falling. You had to lean in close to hear the wheezing breath through its nose. Ellie fell back, hand clutching her chest. A single thought shot through her mind: run and find someone. But this part of town was empty. Adults didn't show up until after 9, when the garbage truck came. She looked at the baby again. 3 seconds of hesitation. Then Ellie took off her hoodie, the only warm thing she owned, and wrapped it tightly around the baby. The infant's body was ice cold. Ellie held it close, arms shielding its head. "Don't sleep, don't sleep." She murmured over and over again, voice soft and raspy, as if she were trying to soothe herself more than the baby. The distance from here to the town hospital was nearly 2 miles. Ellie had never walked that far before. But this time, she ran. Not for herself, not for money, only for the baby who couldn't even cry, just whimpered softly in her cold arms. She knew one thing: if the baby fell asleep now, she would never wake up again. The wind whipped against her face. Her eyes stung. Ellie's stomach growled. It was empty. She hadn't eaten all morning. But she didn't stop. She dodged garbage trucks, leapt over cold puddles splashing from the curb. With every step, her breath grew heavier. With every slip, she clutched the baby tighter, as if afraid she'd fall out of the world. People saw her as she ran down the street, but no one asked, no one stopped. No one noticed the skinny little girl clutching something wrapped in a jacket. The gates of San Rafael Hospital appeared ahead, automatic white doors gleaming like porcelain, guarded by a man in uniform. Ellie didn't know how much farther her legs could go. Her knees ached, one scraped and bleeding from a fall at the intersection, but she didn't stop. The baby in her arms had gone silent. She screamed, loud, desperate, when she saw a hospital staff member. "Please help. Someone. This baby is dying." A doctor turned but walked past. A guard shook his head, signaling her to stop. Ellie's words didn't end with a period. They were a lifeline, pulling every fear, every hope, every dream she never dared to have. Inside the damp hoodie, the baby's eyes stayed shut. Ellie dropped to her knees, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't stand any longer. Her hands trembled, her eyes locked on the hospital's glass doors, and then in the blur of dizziness, a question rose quietly in her mind. If it were me, would anyone save me? Ellie stumbled up the front steps of San Rafael Hospital, her breath puffing out in pale white clouds. Her arms were numb from holding on too long, her hoodie soaked through, and the infant's tiny chest was pressed tightly against her own. Her face had gone pale, but her legs kept moving. Her eyes scanned the large glass doors ahead, the kind where patients were usually wheeled in on gurneys or wheelchairs. A tall security guard in uniform stood beside the automatic entrance, arms crossed, eyes focused on a delivery truck backing into the lot. Ellie picked up her pace. Her trembling feet met the slick tile floor just as the doors slid open. Please help this baby." Her voice cracked, cold, breathless, exhausted. The infant made no sound, its head lolled to one side, tiny face buried in the folds of her sweatshirt. The guard turned. First came surprise, then a frown. "Stop right there, kid, what's going on?" The baby was abandoned, freezing. She's barely breathing. Ellie extended both arms, revealing the soaked blanket and a bluish, lifeless little face. The man didn't move. A long pause hung in the air. From inside the lobby, a nurse on the morning shift walked out, hair neatly tied back, clipboard in hand. "What's happening here?" "She's got a baby with her. No adults around, no paperwork either," the guard said, not taking his eyes off Ellie. The nurse stepped closer, glancing at the child in Ellie's arms. Her brow furrowed instantly. "Is this your baby?" "No, I found her in a trash bin behind the bus stop." "Where exactly?" "Across the street, by the old station." The nurse narrowed her eyes and stepped back half a pace. "No adults, no birth record, no insurance. You can't just carry someone in here and expect emergency care." "But she's dying," Ellie shouted, her voice echoing through the wide hospital entrance. A few people passing by turned to look. A mail clerk standing at the coffee machine froze mid-sip, but no one moved closer. The nurse closed her clipboard and crossed her arms. "Sweetheart, this is a hospital, not a shelter." The words dropped like a stone. Ellie blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "But aren't doctors supposed to save people?" The nurse said nothing. The guard glanced at her, waiting for an answer. The only thing the woman finally said was, "We need to call Child Protective Services. We don't handle things like this." Ellie dropped to her knees. She didn't care that her pants got dirty, didn't flinch at the biting cold against her skin. She held the baby tightly against her chest, her shoulders trembling, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, please don't let her die." Tears fell down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "I don't know what else to do." In that moment, no one moved. A full minute passed, frozen in time. She remained kneeling there, outside a brightly lit hospital, beneath a glowing sign that read, "Life is our priority." The security guard shook his head, one hand reaching for his radio. "I'm calling the police." "This child has no legal guardian." "I didn't do anything wrong." Ellie stepped back, clutching the baby tighter. "I just want someone to save her." Her eyes scanned the nearby adults. A middle-aged man pulled out his phone, not to call for help, but to record. A young woman with a handbag walked by, glanced briefly, then lowered her head and quickened her pace. No one came closer. Ellie understood. This place wasn't meant for her. A soft sound came from beneath the blanket, a faint breath escaping from the baby's throat. Ellie jolted. She was still alive, but barely. Ellie stood up, unsteady, trying to push her way inside. The security guard stopped her, this time with more force. "No, you can't, I already told you." Another nurse walked over. She looked younger. Her eyes still held a trace of kindness, but when she saw the first nurse give a stiff nod, she hesitated, bit her lip and said only, "I'm sorry. I can't help." Ellie said nothing more, no tears, no pleading. She simply stood there, holding the baby tighter, as if both their lives were quietly slipping away. Behind her, the hospital gates slowly closed. ChatGPT Bam, a car door shut firm but unhurried. In the haze of early morning fog, a pair of military boots stepped onto the damp, cold stone pavement, walking steadily toward the hospital entrance. David, 32 years old, a Marine just back from an overseas deployment, breathed in the sharp morning air. He wasn't in a rush. Today was just a routine post-recovery checkup before heading home for good. A canvas backpack hung from his left shoulder. In his right hand, he carried a folder of medical documents. But he stopped in his tracks the moment he heard it. "Please, just save the baby." The voice was barely audible, rasping from a throat dried out by desperation, a sound from someone who had nothing left to lose. David turned. In the corner of the hospital lobby, near the emergency stretcher bay, a small girl was being blocked by two adults in uniform. One was a security guard. The other, a nurse holding a clipboard, had a look of wary suspicion in her eyes. The girl clutched something tightly in her arms. Her eyes lifted, pleading, but the adults weren't listening. They only shook their heads. They began to back away. David didn't understand everything yet, but his body moved before his brain caught up. "What's going on here?" he asked as he approached. The guard turned, scowling. "Back off, sir. This doesn't concern you. We've got it handled." David didn't stop. He took a few more steps and then he saw the child, a newborn, bluish, silent, almost lifeless, wrapped hastily in a soaking wet hoodie. The little girl was holding the infant close to her chest, her body trembling from the cold, yet her arms clung tightly to the bundle like it was the last thing she had in the world. David felt his heart tighten. He had seen casualties on the battlefield before, but nothing compared to this moment, in the middle of a peaceful city, right in front of a gleaming hospital, where a child was gasping for life and no one reached out. He turned to the hospital staff. "What are you doing here? Why isn't the baby being brought inside?" The nurse replied, her voice flat, like she was reading from a report. "No legal guardian, no insurance. Child's condition can't be verified. We've notified social services. You said you can't verify the condition. The baby is about to die right there," David said, not shouting, but his voice was sharp as steel. "Standard procedure for unidentified minors. We follow protocol." David clenched the strap of his backpack, exhaling forcefully through his nose. He looked at the girl. Ellie looked back. Their eyes met, one pair filled with fear, the other shaped by war. David said nothing more. He leaned down and calmly removed his army jacket, heavy, worn, scratched, and wrapped it around Ellie's shoulders. "Keep warm," he whispered. Then, without warning, he bent down and gently but firmly lifted the baby from her arms. "No, no. Where are you taking her?" Ellie cried, gripping his arm in panic. "I'm going to save her, and you too." A small hand still clutched at him, but it couldn't resist the quiet strength in his motion. David walked straight toward the automatic doors, his gaze commanding the entire space. "Stop!" a security guard yelled. "You're not allowed to do that." David didn't look back. "Then file a complaint," he said without breaking stride. "But if none of you will save her, then let me take the blame. I won't let a child die because of red tape." The doors slid open. Cold air rushed in. He stepped inside, carrying a freezing child and the weight of a system that had just said no. Ellie stood there, frozen, watching him go. From behind, a few people began to whisper. Some pulled out their phones to record. Others just stood in silence. The guards and nurses froze. They didn't have time to intervene, and even if they did, they wouldn't have dared. David, no longer a soldier by rank, walked with the weight of both honor and humanity on his shoulders. Minutes later, he handed the baby to the doctors in the emergency room. An older doctor flinched slightly when checking the baby's pulse, then quickly called for internal medicine. Nurses began to run. The vital signs monitor lit up, blinking rapidly. Out in the hallway, David stood still. 1 minute, then 2. Ellie remained beside him, her eyes locked on the closed doors. "My name is Ellie," the girl said softly. David nodded. "And you?" she asked. "David," he replied. "And from now on, you won't have to be alone anymore." The emergency room doors slammed shut behind them, leaving the hallway cold and sterile under pale fluorescent lights. David stood still, his hand resting gently on Ellie's shoulder. The girl was trembling, her eyes wide, still struggling to process what had just happened. In front of her, through the frosted glass, was an entirely different world. Adults in green scrubs, masked faces, machines in motion, all locked in a battle against silence. An older doctor, his hair flecked with grey, rushed in after the short alarm had sounded. They called him Dr. Parker, the attending physician that morning. Without wasting a word, he glanced at the tiny baby lying limp and bluish on the warming table, then turned to the young nurse beside him. "How long?" "Unclear. She was brought in by a little girl. The baby was abandoned in a trash bin. No documents, no idea if she was premature or full term." Parker didn't nod. He immediately bent down to check for a pulse, then shouted, 36 degrees, oxygen low, acute hypothermia. Get the warm IV fluids, full-body heat lamps, start glucose drip. Now! Outside, Ellie gripped the hem of David's coat with white-knuckled fists, her wide eyes fixed on the blurred figures behind the glass. I thought she was already dead." David leaned down, his voice calm, steady. "No, they're fighting. Just like I used to." Ellie looked up at him. Her eyes were brimming. But for the first time, something like hope began to flicker within them. Inside, the soft mechanical rhythm of the ventilator began. Dr. Parker, focused, slipped the breathing tube into the infant's mouth while directing the nurse to inject heart stimulant. Beads of sweat lined his forehead, despite the frigid morning outside. "Get a tympanic thermometer ready. Start chest compressions if we lose pulse." "Yes, doctor." Ellie pulled her legs up onto the bench in the hallway, fingers interlaced so tightly they turned pale. She whispered, "She's so tiny. Why would anyone throw her away like garbage?" David sat down beside her, saying nothing at first. He stared at the closed doors ahead, then finally spoke. "Not everyone has a heart like yours, Ellie, but sometimes it only takes one brave person to change a life's fate." Inside the room, Dr. Parker leaned in closer. The heartbeat was still weak. The numbers on the monitor flashed red. 68, then 65, 61. "Don't give up, little one. We don't even know your name yet." He pulled his hand from his coat and gently pressed 2 fingers against the baby's chest. Firm, rhythmic motions. The vital signs monitor blared continuously. "Get NICU on standby. Prep the incubator." 5 minutes passed. David didn't move from the glass. Ellie had her head resting on her arms, barely breathing. The baby still hadn't cried. Not a single sound. 8 minutes. A nurse rushed out, saying nothing, just grabbing more vasopressors. David reached for Ellie's hand. "Almost there." She shook her head. "No, no one promised they'd save her." 1 second, 2 seconds. The door swung open. Dr. Parker stepped out, pulling down his mask. Beads of sweat trailed slowly down his forehead. His eyes scanned the hallway, then landed on Ellie. "The baby is out of danger." He didn't say it loudly, there was no drama, but those words fell into Ellie's chest like warm water in the middle of ice. She shot up, hands covering her face, and broke into tears. She made it. She's really alive. David caught her as her knees buckled from the emotion. Ellie couldn't hold back her sobs. She was crying and laughing at the same time, her face drenched in tears. I held on to her. I really held on. Parker stepped closer, kneeling so he was eye level with the girl. He looked at Ellie for a long moment, then asked, "You were the one who brought her in?" Ellie nodded. "You saved her life. If you'd been 10 minutes later, there wouldn't have been anything we could do." Ellie said nothing more. She just lowered her head, her small hand clutching the hem of the military coat wrapped around her. the one still holding the warmth of the soldier who had walked with her when no one else had. David placed a hand on Parker's shoulder and nodded, wordlessly, gratefully. The hallway fell quiet. The young nurse from earlier, the one who had turned her back, approached, silently handing Ellie a cup of hot cocoa. She didn't say a word, just bowed her head. Ellie took it. Her small hands cradled the cup like it was something sacred. She sat on the hospital bench, eyes red, holding the warm drink. David sat beside her, silent, looking through the glass at the breathing form of a baby who had no name. And for the first time in a world that had so often shut its doors to her, something opened, because someone had said, "I'll take responsibility, but I won't let a child die because of paperwork." The intensive care unit on the 3rd floor of San Rafael Hospital was unusually quiet. The lighting was softer, the machines hummed more gently, and every footstep seemed muffled. Behind the thick glass, a newborn baby, still unnamed, lay in the incubator, her tiny hands moving faintly, as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. David stood nearby, arms folded across his chest. Next to him, Ellie rested her head against the glass panel. Her breath left soft, foggy marks, a quiet reflection of a childhood no one should have to endure. The door opened. A middle-aged woman in a light beige blazer entered. Her stride was firm, but her face was not unkind. Linda Carter, a social worker, glanced around the room, met David's eyes, then stopped at Ellie. "You're the one who brought the baby in." Her voice was gentle. Ellie nodded, stepping back slightly behind David. David gave a brief nod in return. "I helped her get to the hospital. The baby was severely hypothermic. She almost didn't make it. If Ellie hadn't brought her when she did..." Miss Carter took out a notepad and sat down on a chair by the wall. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what happened, just however you remember it?" Ellie hesitated. It wasn't until David leaned down and gave her a small, reassuring nod that she began to speak. Her voice was quiet and hoarse. "That day, I was out collecting cans like always. I heard crying, like a kitten, kind of. I followed the sound and found a box. It was soaked through. Inside was the baby. I didn't know who she was." "There wasn't anyone else around? No one leaving the baby and walking away?" Miss Carter asked. "No. That place is full of abandoned houses. No cameras, no people." Miss Carter wrote slowly. "Where's your family, Ellie? Where's your mother?" Ellie pressed her lips together, eyes lowered to her hands, now tightly woven in her lap. After a pause, her voice came, soft and trembling, as if saying it louder might shatter the memory again. "My mom died. When I was 8, she had cancer, late stage." She swallowed dryly, her eyes still fixed on the floor. "We were living in this old rental near the bus station. She couldn't get out of bed for the last few months." Her voice dropped lower. "And my dad, he left. The moment she got sick, he walked out and never came back. Didn't leave an address. Nobody on his side of the family ever reached out after that." She looked up, eyes red but dry, as if trying to keep the past from swallowing her whole. "So, it's just me and... Mom. And now she's gone too." David frowned. "My mom was an only child. My grandparents died in a car crash when she was young, so when she passed, there was no one left to take me in." "Then who's been caring for you these past 2 years?" Mrs. Carter asked gently. "Mrs. June. She lived in the apartment downstairs. When Mum got sick, she used to bring over porridge and medicine. After Mum died, she was the one who brought me into her home. She said, 'If no one else will take you, I will. If no one else cares, I will.'" "Did Mrs. June sign any legal guardianship papers?" Mrs. Carter's voice changed. "No," Ellie shook her head. "I just stayed with her. No one asked. No one checked. She has arthritis and can't get around much. So I picked up recyclables, bought groceries and paid for her medicine." Mrs. Carter sat quietly at the head of the table. The pen in her hand paused over the worn leather notebook, already half filled with notes. The unfinished lines lay there, hesitant, like they'd stumbled upon a truth no one dared to name. Under the pale yellow light of the meeting room, her face carried not the usual pity of seasoned social workers, but something heavier, like what she was hearing didn't fit into the margins of any report. David stood nearby, arms folded, voice low and tight. This girl hasn't been to school, no medical records, no education files, no supervision, no oversight. And yet she's still alive, because she decided she wasn't allowed to die. The room fell silent, as though even the walls had paused to listen. The soft beeping of the monitor behind the glass, where the newborn still lay in the NICU, echoed like a whisper, reminding everyone how fragile life still was. After a long while, Ellie, sitting in a fabric chair much too big for her small frame, spoke so softly it nearly dissolved into the air. "I don't know the baby's name. No one told me. But if I walk away, who's going to stay?" It wasn't the voice of a child trying to sound grown up. It was simple, honest, and because of that, it cut straight to the bone. Mrs. Carter looked up. Her gaze was no longer that of a supervisor, but of a human being who had just seen what the system had long overlooked. She stared at Ellie for a long while. A frail little figure, round shoulders hunched inside a worn-out sweater, tangled hair tied back with a plastic string. In her eyes, this child was no longer a witness or a case to verify. She had become a living question the world had yet to answer. Her voice dropped, soft yet firm. "You know, Ellie, some children wait their whole life to be rescued, and no one ever comes. But you didn't wait. You showed up. You pulled him back from the edge of death." No one said anything more. But in that moment, the three people in the room, a seasoned social nurse, a soldier who had once seen war, and a poor little girl who collected scrap to survive, quietly looked through the glass at the fragile life that had just been pulled back from the grip of death. And for the first time, they all thought of the word family, not as a legal term, but as something built by those who choose not to turn away. David looked at Ellie differently now. It wasn't pity anymore. It was respect. "Have you given him a name yet?" he asked gently. Ellie turned her gaze to the incubator. Her eyes softened, warmth settling in. Then she whispered, "Gabriel, the angel I pulled out of the trash." David allowed himself a rare smile, but something in his chest shifted, not just because of the name, but because that little girl, in a world full of people who look away, had chosen to step toward a child with no name. And maybe, just maybe, she too was still waiting for someone to take a step toward her. The morning sunlight streamed through the large window of the neonatal care room. It was soft, quiet light, gently falling onto the thin blanket covering the incubator. The baby no longer looked pale or breathless. Now there was only soft pink skin and a steady heartbeat blinking calmly on the monitor. Ellie stood close to the glass, both hands pressed against the edge of the door, as if afraid all of this was just a dream. She stared at the baby, then looked up and asked quietly, "Uncle David, has he opened his eyes today?" David stood beside her, his hands tucked into the pockets of his military fatigues. He had changed out of his boots, but he still wore the uniform, as if holding on to a thread of the life he once knew. But when he looked at Ellie, and then at the little boy, that thread began to loosen. "Not yet," David said softly, "but the doctors say everything looks stable. He just needs a few more days." "Then, can I touch him today?" David glanced at the on-duty nurse. She gave a small nod. "Only with gloves and after disinfecting." Ellie nodded quickly and followed the instructions without hesitation. She slipped her hand, awkward but careful, through the small access port of the incubator. The baby's tiny fingers brushed against her index finger. "So warm," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the small, trembling arm. Later that afternoon, Linda Carter, the social worker, returned to the hospital. "You're still here?" she asked when she saw Ellie sitting quietly on the bench in the hallway. Ellie nodded. "You haven't eaten anything, have you?" Linda asked again. "I'm not hungry. I just want to be near him," Ellie replied simply. David stood at the end of the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. Light from the window filled the cold space behind him. The call had just ended. As he turned around, he saw Mrs. Carter waiting, holding a file in her hand, her expression serious, but not unkind. She gave a small gesture, inviting him to step into the side corridor for a private conversation. "We just submitted the report regarding the newborn's condition," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Since there's no birth certificate, no family to confirm identity, by regulation, we're required to transfer the infant to a temporary intake facility within 72 hours. David stopped in his tracks. His hand clenched slightly, almost without realizing. A slow breath escaped through his lips before he spoke, voice low. "She barely survived a few hours ago, and it was Ellie, a 10-year-old child, fragile as a winter leaf, who held that baby in her arms, ran for miles in the bitter cold begging for help." He looked at her. His gaze wasn't angry, but it carried the weight of something deeper, buried frustration. And now, the first warmth that child ever felt, the first skin she touched, the smell of that old sweater she buried her face into. "You're saying they have to be separated, as if none of that matters between two children?" Mrs. Carter exhaled quietly, visibly uncomfortable. Her voice slowed, softened, but didn't waver. "David, I understand how you feel. Believe me, I've seen many children torn away from each other. But Ellie, she's not a legal guardian. She's also an unregistered minor, with no known guardian, no permanent address, no identification." She paused a moment before continuing. "The law is very clear. We can't keep the infant here longer than 72 hours without proper documentation. And I'm not authorized to keep the two of them together just because of emotional attachment. I can't let feelings override legal process." David said nothing. His jaw tightened slightly. His eyes drifted down the hall into the dimness, as if trying to wrestle with something deep inside. Mrs. Carter went on, her tone a touch gentler, though her stance remained unchanged. "I've requested special permission for Ellie to visit the baby a few more times, at least until the transport from the center arrives. But when the time comes, I need to be certain there will be no resistance to the transfer." David didn't respond right away, but his eyes stayed fixed on the neonatal room where a newborn lay breathing through a tube, and a small girl stood just outside hugging a worn-out teddy bear, waiting to see the only soul in the world she called sister. That nightfall, ChatGPT Danoi. Ellie sat by the window, knees pulled up to her chest. David sat beside her. Neither of them spoke. Then Ellie looked up at him. Her face was dry, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Uncle David." "Yes. I know I'm not her mother. I do. But I was the first to hold her, the first to hear her cry, the first to keep her alive when she was left in that dumpster." "Yeah," David replied, gently, waiting for more. "I have nothing to prove it. No documents, no witnesses. But if I walk away, who's going to stay?" David looked at her. He had once held the lives of fellow soldiers in his hands, made split-second choices between life and death under fire, but no question had ever weighed heavier than this. He placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder. "You don't have to choose alone anymore. From now on, I'm staying with you." In the incubator across the room, Gabriel stirred slightly. No one could hear it, but if feelings could be read from eyes that small, maybe, just maybe, he was whispering a thank you too, for being chosen, for being given a name, and for someone who didn't walk away. Beep, beep! The sound of a phone echoed through the sealed conference room on the 3rd floor of City Hall. On the large screen, a headline flashed like a punch to the gut of the system. 10-year-old girl denied help while carrying a dying infant to the gates of San Rafael Hospital. The deputy mayor, a balding man with dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, slammed his pen down on the table. "Who leaked this?" "We haven't confirmed that yet," a female secretary replied, "but it appears a nurse may have spoken to the local press." "Oh, fantastic," he snapped, slapping the table. "Before we've even finished the official report, the whole town already believes we abandoned children at the hospital gate." That morning at San Rafael Hospital, there were no cheerful greetings. Nurses moved silently through the halls, avoiding eye contact, as if everyone were carrying the weight of the same shame. In an emergency meeting, the hospital's director, Dean Rutherford, slammed a printed copy of the article onto the table. The headline stood bold above the photo: Ellie, kneeling in the cold, cradling the infant tightly in her arms. "This is the first thing people saw when they opened the paper this morning," he said, his voice hissing through clenched teeth. He looked down at two people who sat with their heads lowered: head nurse Miriam Spencer, the one who had loudly ordered Ellie to leave, and security guard Marcus Doyle, the man who said, "This is a hospital, not an orphanage. You are both suspended, effective immediately," he declared. "An internal investigation begins at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If I find out anyone intentionally altered or withheld the intake records from that day, I will personally hand this over to the Department of Justice." Following the incident, when Ellie refused to be separated from the baby and pleaded to see Gabriel just one more time, Mrs. Carter and the social workers were forced to consider an emergency solution. It was unthinkable to send the girl back to the slums, where there was no electricity, no running water, and the elderly neighbor who once took her in had just been hospitalized for heart failure. David stepped forward, offering to take temporary custody of Ellie while waiting for the court's decision. He brought her home to a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't spacious, it wasn't fancy, but it was clean, warm, and had a bed where a child could finally sleep, without hearing screaming voices or the wind howling through holes in the tin roof. The first night passed in silence. David made some soup. Ellie ate just a little, spending most of the time looking around, still unable to believe she was in a place without rats chewing on slippers or water leaking from the ceiling. Now, with the warm yellow light from the living room casting a soft glow on the spotless floor, Ellie sat curled up on the sofa, clutching a soft pillow tightly. The TV was still on, a local news segment replaying the story. The little girl who carried a newborn to the hospital. A blurry photo had been enlarged. Ellie holding Gabriel in her arms, her face smudged with dirt but her eyes steady with determination. "I didn't know my face would end up in the news," she whispered, almost talking to herself. David was in the small kitchen, pouring her a glass of warm milk. He brought it out and set it on the table next to her. "You were the only one in that whole story who did the right thing," he said, sitting across from her. "And now, people are listening." Ellie didn't say a word. She looked at the milk, her small hands gripping the pillow like if she let go, someone might come and take her away. David stood up and walked into his study. A moment later, he returned holding a stack of freshly printed papers, the ink still faintly fragrant. He placed them on the table, his gaze steady, not pressuring, just sincere. "I need to ask for your permission about something." That afternoon, David had been summoned to a meeting at the Office of Child Welfare. In the room were two representatives from social services, a city prosecutor, a supervisory attorney, and hospital director Dean, with a heavy expression on his face. "We didn't call you here to commend you," the lead official began. "You entered the intake area without authorization and interfered with the legal procedures of a public hospital." David nodded. "I know. And you had no license, no legal right to care for any of the children involved in that situation." David didn't flinch. He simply responded, "Because no one with a license was there. A child nearly died in a trash bin." The entire room fell silent. "Do we have a copy of the statement you submitted to the press?" one person asked. David pulled 3 sheets of paper from his briefcase and laid them on the table. "It's not a statement. It's a proposal. I want to establish an independent organization called the Gabriel Humanitarian Foundation to protect abandoned or unidentified children within this very system." "What system?" Someone raised an eyebrow. David looked directly at them. "The system that once said, 'If you have no parents, There's no hope. If you have no insurance, you don't get to cry. If you have no citizenship, you don't deserve to survive. A man stood up, the district attorney. He reached into his own case and pulled out a report. I received this the same day. Some parts were blacked out. And the security footage. There's a missing 12-minute segment. That was when I carried the baby into the ER, David said without blinking. What do you want from me? The prosecutor laid the report on the table, paused for a moment, and then tore it to shreds in front of the room. We don't need a defense, he said. We need a better system. And maybe that begins with you. The next morning, a second article appeared on front pages everywhere, accompanied by a photo of David holding Gabriel. From trash bin to a soldier's arms, Gabriel's journey. The media swarmed the hospital, City Hall, even the neighborhood where Ellie had once lived. Public opinion split, half applauding the actions of David and Ellie, the other half questioning how the system could have allowed it to happen in the first place. But no matter which side they were on, everyone agreed on one thing. A 10-year-old girl should never be the first line of defense for a dying infant. That evening, David took Ellie to Central Park. They sat on a wooden bench beneath a large tree. In front of them were hundreds of lit candles, a spontaneous, quiet vigil for the nameless children. Ellie gazed at the sea of flickering lights, then turned to David. You think we can really do it? The Gabriel Foundation? David placed a hand gently on her shoulder and said softly, I don't know if we can, but I know we have to try. The faint static hum from the old security monitor seemed to freeze the entire room. On the grainy screen appeared a familiar scene, the abandoned bus stop, still shrouded in darkness. A small, frail figure emerged, trembling, inching slowly toward a pile of trash. No one spoke. The girl bent down, placed a light brown cardboard box on the cold concrete ground, crouched beside it for a few seconds, as if whispering something to whatever was inside, then bolted into the night, swallowed by the shadows. Zoom in on the footage at 03:47, David said, pausing the frame with a firm tap. Chief Investigator of the Child Protection Unit, Rita Monroe, nodded. The technician adjusted the feed. A few seconds later, the image sharpened. A young woman, disheveled brown hair, wearing a denim jacket with a torn shoulder, her eyes swollen, face pale, lips tinted blue from the cold. No gloves, no hat, no bags, just a 19-year-old girl walking alone in the dead of winter, leaving a baby in a trash pile. Who is she? Ellie asked quietly. Rita opened the file in front of her, flipped through a few pages, then stopped. Her eyes scanned the dense, neatly typed notes. Her voice was steady, not harsh, but unmistakably firm. Rachel Goss, no fixed residence, previously moved between low-income rental units, none of them officially registered, dropped out of school midway through 11th grade, no formal diploma. Her mother died in a traffic accident when Rachel was 16. After that, there was no further contact with her father. His identity and whereabouts remain unknown. She paused for a moment, then continued, slower this time. In her high school file, there's a note from the school counselor. Rachel was once referred to a mental health specialist due to signs of depression. Specific symptoms included chronic insomnia, disordered eating, and social withdrawal. However, treatment was discontinued, and there was no long-term follow-up. Rita gently closed the file. Her gaze no longer belonged to someone just reading a case report, but to someone beginning to see the cascading wreckage of a young woman's life unraveling within a system that had quietly abandoned her. David clenched his jaw. Is she still in town? Most likely, Mrs. Rita replied. There was a report from a station attendant about a girl matching her description sleeping near the tracks. 2 hours later, at the West Side train station, David and a local police officer found Rachel. She was curled up on a cold wooden bench, a denim jacket loosely draped over her. At her feet was a plastic bag containing a few dry rolls of bread and some unopened packs of diapers. She didn't hear them approach, not until Ellie softly called out, Are you Rachel?" Rachel jolted upright, instinctively pulling away as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. Her eyes, red and swollen, darted back and forth between the adults and the girl. "Is the baby okay?" Rachel's voice was hoarse. David nodded. "She's safe. Fortunately, someone found her just in time." Rachel lowered her head to her knees and said nothing. "Do you understand what you did?" Ellie asked. The question wasn't harsh, but it landed heavy in the air. Rachel trembled. I didn't know what else to do. I tried to take care of her, but she kept crying. And I had no milk, no money, no home. No one." Her voice broke as she covered her face with her hands. "I didn't just leave her anywhere. I left her where there were people. I thought maybe someone better than me would help." They brought Rachel to a temporary shelter. A social worker was called to assess her mental state and investigate her living conditions. David sat in the waiting area outside, eyes distant. Ellie sat beside him, hands resting on her lap, still. "Do you think she deserves to be forgiven?" Ellie asked softly. David turned to her. "What do you think?" Ellie hesitated, then said, "At first I hated her, because who could leave a baby like that? But then, when I saw her, all I felt was sadness. Because if no one ever helps her, then she's just another lost kid." A week later, during a closed meeting with social services staff, a final decision was made. Rachel was deemed unfit, legally, emotionally, and financially, to care for her child. She was advised to sign the papers relinquishing custody and enter a treatment program. Rachel sat in silence for a long time. Then, she signed. That afternoon, Ellie returned to the hospital and sat beside the bassinet where baby Gabriel was sleeping. He lay still, breathing softly, his tiny hand loosely wrapped around her finger. David entered the room, holding a piece of paper folded in quarters. He sat down and handed it to Ellie. It was a short, handwritten note Rachel had left behind. "Ellie, thank you for holding him. You did what I didn't have the strength to do. If my child ever calls someone Mom, I hope it's you, Rachel." Ellie folded the note and placed it next to Gabriel, whispering, "She's not a bad person. She just needed a chance." David gently placed a hand on her shoulder. He said nothing. On the way home, Ellie looked out the car window. The evening lights bathed the road in a soft, honey-colored glow. She asked quietly, "If someone once left you behind, do you ever have the right to hate them forever, Uncle?" David thought for a few seconds, then answered, "No one can force you to forgive. But if you're strong enough to understand and brave enough to forgive, then you might be the one who saves them from that wound." Ellie sat still. She said nothing more. But in her heart, something had begun to soften. The sound of the gavel echoed, soft, yet weighty, like a milestone being marked. In front of the judge lay a thick case file, bound with an old black binder clip. The top page read clearly, "Petition for the adoption of 2 minor children, Ellie, 10 years old, and Gabrielle, under 1 month old. Petitioner, David Cole, U.S. citizen, former military serviceman, currently unmarried." Out in the hallway of the Kingston County Child Welfare Department, the air felt heavy, almost still. Ellie sat beside David, clutching the handkerchief he had given her that morning. Her eyes were still red, but dry. She had cried many times, afraid of being separated from Gabriel. This time she didn't cry. She waited, because she believed. David sat upright next to her. His simple ash-grey suit did little to hide the bearing of a battle-tested soldier. But today, there was no steel in his eyes. Only the quiet gaze of a man carrying one thing: responsibility. 10 days earlier, David had written the guardianship petition by hand. No lawyer, no lofty legal terms. Every line was a truth from his own heart. "I did not father these children. I didn't know them before that day. But I heard the cry. I saw the infant curled up in a cardboard box, lips blue from the cold. And I saw a little girl, no bigger than a grade schooler, cradling her baby brother with trembling arms, begging to be let into the hospital. I couldn't walk away. And from that moment on, I was no longer a bystander. David's file wasn't perfect. He was single, had no significant assets, no experience raising children, but he had something else, the courage to act in the face of injustice, and a heart large enough to love 2 children who shared no blood with him. The morning before the hearing, David took Ellie to a special place, a small wooden house in the suburbs that he had just finished renovating. It was the house his father had left behind, abandoned for years after his mother passed. David had repainted every window by hand, trimmed the overgrown grass, replaced the locks, and slowly, deliberately, purchased each household item. When the car came to a stop, Ellie opened the door and stepped out. Her first feeling wasn't surprise, it was stillness. In front of her was a small yard, scattered with soft green tufts of grass, neatly cleaned and cleared. A hammock swayed gently under the shade of an oak tree beside the porch. On the windowsill, a bunch of yellow daisies bloomed. The same flowers she had once drawn at the hospital, the same ones she had whispered to Gabriel about. "If we ever have a home, I'll plant yellow daisies." David handed her a key. "Would you like to open the door?" Ellie nodded. Her small hand took the key, trembling slightly, then turned it with quiet resolve. Inside was a modest but cozy room, a clean kitchen, a cream-colored tablecloth. On the wall, a framed photo, David holding Gabriel and Ellie standing next to them, smiling. The photo was taken right after Gabriel had survived his medical crisis. David had it printed and saved since that day, never mentioning it to Ellie, until now. I don't know what to say," Ellie whispered. "You don't have to say anything," David replied. "Just know this is a place where you'll always belong." But that joy was soon tested. An internal memo from the Department of Child Welfare arrived. Ellie and Gabriel's files would be separated. The agency deemed it unreasonable for a single man like David to raise 2 children who weren't related by blood and had vastly different ages and care needs. David rushed to meet the case officer. The conversation took place in a small conference room. The attorney from the agency explained, "We don't question your good intentions, but under current policy, infants are typically prioritized for adoption by families with experience caring for young children. As for Ellie, given her history of instability, she needs to be placed separately for assessment on her adaptability." David spoke, not loudly but with unmistakable clarity. "If you believe separating these 2 children is your idea of stability, then perhaps you've never seen a little girl trembling as she clutches her baby brother in the cold while no one else even bothers to look down." That evening, David told Ellie everything. "Are they going to take Gabriel away from me?" Ellie asked, her voice barely a whisper. David didn't lie. "That's what they're considering, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep you 2 together." Ellie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "If I lose Gabriel, then I don't need a house. I don't need flowers, I don't need a warm kitchen, because I only know how to love him." The next day, a consultation session was held at the Child Protective Services office. David, Ellie, a legal representative, and 2 social workers sat around the table. Once again, the proposal to separate the 2 children was read aloud. This time, Ellie didn't wait for them to finish. She shot up from her seat, clutching Gabriel tightly in her arms, the baby still fast asleep in a blanket. "I kept him alive. I'm not asking to adopt him, I'm just a kid. But I warmed his body with mine. I held him the whole way as I ran to the hospital. Please don't take him away from me. Please." Someone in the room turned their face away. Another lowered their head. David placed a hand gently on Ellie's shoulder, but no one interrupted her. Because truth doesn't need defending, it only needs to be heard. 2 days later, the court scheduled an official hearing. David, Ellie, and Gabriel would appear together, and for the first time, there would be a real chance for them to be seen as a family. The sound of a gavel echoed through the small room inside Kingston County Hall. Outside, the late spring sunlight poured quietly across the porch, casting a golden glow through the faded old windows. Inside, rows of wooden benches were neatly arranged, where witnesses, from Nurse Carmen to Dr. Parker, sat in solemn silence, waiting their turn to speak. David Cole, dressed in a crisp white shirt, stood straight before the bench. Beside him sat Ellie, in a simple floral dress, her hair neatly braided, quietly holding Gabriel wrapped in an ivory knit blanket. The baby slept peacefully, unaware that the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for a decision that could determine their future. "Mr. Cole," Judge Beringer began, his voice steady but not cold, "would you please explain why you are seeking guardianship of both children?" David stepped forward half a pace. He had no attorney with him. Just a handwritten statement tucked inside a thin folder. "Your Honor," he began, his eyes never leaving Ellie, "I don't have much. I was a soldier. I know how to protect. But when I saw Ellie being turned away from the hospital gate, I realized sometimes the battlefield isn't where the bullets fly. It's where we choose to stand when everyone else walks away." He paused, then added more quietly, "I'm not their biological father. But I was the first to say, 'What do you need, sweetheart?' That, I believe, is enough, at least to begin." Nurse Carmen, the one on shift that morning, nodded firmly. "If it weren't for David, that baby would have died out there. And Ellie, she's the bravest child I've ever met." When it was Ellie's turn, a social worker gently helped her to the stand. They asked her, "Can you tell us why you want to stay with Mr. David?" Ellie looked around, eyes glistening, then glanced at David, then at Gabriel. 1 second of silence. "Because he's the only one who stepped up when no one else did. And because he didn't need to know who I was, he still chose to stay." The room went silent. A doctor turned away to wipe her tears. Judge Beringer leaned back in his chair and clasped his hands together. 15 minutes later, he made his ruling. After reviewing the full case file, the court grants special guardianship to Mr. David Cole for both Ellie and baby Gabriel, with regular oversight by Child Welfare Services. Court is adjourned. That afternoon, the three of them returned to the small house in the suburbs. The old wooden gate had been freshly painted. The backyard bloomed with yellow daisies, the same kind Ellie remembered from when she was little, back when her mother was still alive. David placed a fresh bouquet in a glass jar on the dining table. He picked up a sleeping Gabriel and laid him gently on a cushioned chair in the kitchen. Ellie walked out to the backyard, gazing at the windless sky. She sat on the grass, slowly twirling a flower petal between her fingers. David came over and sat beside her. "I know you once said no one ever needed you." Ellie nodded. "But now, do you need anyone?" Ellie smiled softly. "I don't know, but Gabriel needs me, and I need you." They sat in silence. In that moment, nothing felt broken anymore. That night, Ellie whispered to her baby brother, "From now on, you'll never have to cry in the trash again. We have a home now." Outside, the daisies swayed in the gentle breeze. Moonlight spilled through the window, tender and quiet, like an unspoken promise from a family just beginning to form. Today's story isn't just about a 10-year-old girl carrying a newborn through the cold night. It's about compassion, something that still exists, even in a world that sometimes forgets how to feel. Ellie had no power, no money, but she had a brave heart, and that young soldier, with one decisive act, reminded us that silence can sometimes be a form of complicity. But standing up for the vulnerable, that's how humanity begins to heal itself. If it were you, would you have stopped, like that soldier did? Have you ever witnessed a single act of kindness change someone's fate? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your story deserves to be heard too. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. How have you been lately? I hope you're doing okay. And hey, no matter how busy life gets, don't forget to drink a warm glass of water, maybe put on a face mask, and give your mind a little rest. You deserve that. I know life isn't always easy, but I hope today's story brought you a little warmth, like a quiet hug on a tired day.